Hey everyone, this is Steve from GamersNexus.net, and today we're looking at video cards once again. That is a thing that we do a lot. So this time it's a buyer's guide from the bottom to the top of the best video cards out there for gaming. And I'm specifically looking at the $90 price range at the very, very low end, entry level, HTPC level, all the way up to $600 for the flagship cards that are out there by NVIDIA and AMD. And this buyer's guide really should be used as a tool, especially for the holiday season, but it will extend into 2015 for relevance because we don't have new cards yet. So this is still relevant until those new cards start shipping. The guide starts with the Radeon R7 260X, which is presently available for about $95. That is a steal for the card that it is. It looks similar to this. This is a 250X. And it will be able to push about low to medium settings depending on the game at 1080p. Now this is a card that's going to be lower TDP than other AMD devices, but still higher than NVIDIA's most immediate competitors. It's not going to produce the amount of heat though that AMD is known for with its 290X, for example. So it's not like it's crazy hot, but it does require more power than what NVIDIA would require. The 260X will play games very well at low settings, should play most games that are not AAA massive graphics demos at medium. You will not be playing Assassin's Creed Unity or Far Cry 4 or Watch Dogs on this 260X. You can play Battlefield 4 on low settings, but that's really sort of the extent of the higher fidelity graphics games that you'll be playing with a 260X. It is mostly meant for ultra budget PCs, stuff that's going to be playing LOL, WoW, Star Wars, you name it, stuff like that, Skyrim, Grid, games like that, it will play very well. As an alternative to the 260X, there is the 750. This is a passive 750, which is priced at around $100 to $120. It does get a bit steeper if it's passive. And this is really something you would want to buy if you have a very specific use case scenario. For instance, if you're building a home theater PC that needs to eliminate cables wherever possible, this does not require any power cables. It can run completely off PCIe power. And it's also useful if you want to eliminate fan noise. It will perform slightly lower than the 260X. I would recommend the 260X if you're strictly gaming on a very tight budget, and recommend this if you have specific HTPC needs. Moving up to the next price range, we've got the budget price range, as we call it on Gamers Nexus, and that includes the Radeon R9 270 and the GTX 750 Ti, and those two cards look something like this. The R9 270 is a very high-performing card for the price. It originally shipped closer to $200, but it's now it was about $180. 270X was about $200. Both cards, respectively, are now about $150 and $160. So, big price drop. The GTX 750 Ti is presently available for about $130. So you're basically looking at the sub $150 range. You're looking at the R9 270 for $147 and the GTX 750 Ti for $130. Both are very good. The 750 Ti obviously has differences in software, more active driver updates, although AMD is changing that very soon. And it's got NVIDIA's GFE and Shadowplay, which may be useful to you. That said, AMD has GVR, which does similar things, and they have drivers updating very soon that will update their software quite a bit. Ultimately, what you're looking at is TDP and price. If you don't care too much about the extra power requirement, you don't care about the power cable required, the 6-pin for a 270, then grab the 270 for $147 if you can afford it, because that is a crazy good budget gaming card. And most systems at 1080 will be playing just fine, medium to high-ish settings depending on the game. Obviously, your anti-aliasing, all that stuff makes a huge impact on the performance, but for the most part, you'll be playing games like Titanfall on high. Games like even Far Cry will play fairly well once the stuttering is resolved by Ubisoft, and Grid easily high, ultra, and so forth. The GTX 750 Ti performs very well also. It'll play Battlefield 4 in my testing at high settings pretty darn well, about 40 FPS depending on your CPU and other components, and that is very competitive with the 270, but the 270 hands down is a better performer strictly in terms of FPS. This requires less power at 65 watts, does not require a power connector at all, and can be put into a smaller box, and it's just cheaper. It's $17 cheaper. So if you can't afford the jump from 130-ish to 150-ish, just grab a 750 Ti. You'll probably be happy. Check the benchmarks on our website first to make sure it's going to play what you want to play. But for the most part, it's a good card. Alright, now we're getting into the mid-range cards. These are the fun ones. The mid-range price point has suddenly become more relevant, strictly because 4GB VRAM cards are now seeing heavy use in games specifically made by Ubisoft, but I expect that trend will continue with the other AAA makers very shortly. In my testing, Far Cry 4 and Assassin's Creed Unity both use upwards of 4GB of RAM if you make it available. That is not to say it's necessary to have 4GB. It will just consume that much memory from the video card if it is present. So it's probably a good idea to start prepping and moving in the direction of higher capacity video cards. For that reason, we recommend the R9 280X as our primary go-to card for the 150-ish to 250-ish price point. And that's just because it's a very high performer. It beats out the GTX 770 in quite a few games frame per frame. And the 770 pulls ahead a little bit in some games, like Battlefield 4, but that's about it. For the most part, they're either equal or the 280X outperforms it a good bit. And it's also priced at $200 for the 280X, comes with 3GB of video RAM. This is a GTX 770, currently priced at about $250 for 2GB of video RAM. Performs very well if you're doing things that are CUDA based or compute based. If you are a hobbyist YouTube video editor or streamer and you use render and editing software that will make use of CUDA, you'll probably want this instead of the 280X. Gaming performance will be slightly lower, but your production performance will be way higher than what AMD can currently provide for Sony and Adobe software. The GTX 770 is still a very good card, but at $250, it's pretty tough to beat the $200 280X, which really does outperform it in raw power. Then there's the GTX 760. If you can't afford either of those, I've seen GTX 760s for $190 lately, depending on the sale and where you go. And that is really a pretty crazy deal considering the card was originally a mid-ranger in the 250 plus range when it launched. So that's a very good buy if you can't afford the extra for a 280X or a 770 at this one $250. Next we've got high-end cards. This would include the new GTX 970. Very powerful, low TDP, low thermals, and great engineering design on the Maxwell architecture and the reference cooler. And AMD's R9 290X. This one's much hotter. It runs very high wattage. You can check all the specs on the website and the link in the description below. But it pushes pretty high performance, so it does make up for it a bit. But in the article, I say our go-to is the GTX 970. This is the price point where NVIDIA sort of takes the market by storm for gaming, because the value for TDP, for thermals, you're cramming these bigger cards into cases. It's time to start being concerned about thermals. And for the performance of the 970 is very good. It's really pretty unbeatable at $350-ish, $370 for the 4GB VRAM version. The 290X is $300 now, which is crazy cheap. AMD is definitely trying to fight back, so it is very tempting to get one of these at that $70 cheaper price point. But honestly, I would push you toward the 970 because engineering-wise, it is a far more sound device for the thermals, the cooling, and the software and drivers. AMD does very well in the previous price ranges, as you've noticed in this video. But really, the 970 will play everything at Ultra. I've tested it. It plays Ultra very well for pretty much all games right now. Plays ACU well, Far Cry 4 well, can even play Watch Dogs, which is saying something because Watch Dogs is not optimized. And you'll be happy with that card. Now, if you're exceeding 1080p, if you're exceeding single monitor use, then it's time to consider something like the GTX 980 or an SLI setup. And the GTX 980 is something we benchmarked, and it's the best video card I've ever tested on the bench for gaming in this price point. Is available at $550. Plays everything at max. pretty much no problem at 1080p, and will play some games with DSR scaling to 1440 or 4K fairly well, depending on what game it is and how intensive it is originally. You will struggle with 4K gaming. That's really not feasible yet on a single GPU. You definitely need either a high RAM AMD solution for that, or an SLI setup, or something of that nature if you want 4K gaming. That's really not the focus of this article. But I would say that the 980 is the best flagship buy right now at the $550 price point. Do note that it's about a 10% improvement over the 970, so the gains are small and the price jump is big. It's $200 more. So again, top to bottom, GTX 980 is our flagship recommendation. The GTX 970 is our go-to high-end recommendation, with the 290X trailing if you can't afford that price gap and you don't care about thermals. In the mid-range, the best card is easily AMD's R9 280X for $200, because it's just simply an unbeatable price, and the performance is on par with a 770, which is $50 more, actually better than the 770 in a lot of cases. The 770 is what we recommend if you want NVIDIA very strongly, if you have use for their software, or if you are using CUDA-enabled applications like Premiere, Sony Vegas, and things like that. The 760 is what we would recommend if you can't afford the $200 280X, or you can and you really just have a strong feeling toward NVIDIA, which you should not buy that way, but I understand that some people can get like that when they've been screwed by one company or another, so that is an alternative. Do note it will perform significantly lower in frame rate than the 280X, but it's a bit cheaper and it's a good card anyway, so it'll still play everything on high, no problem. Moving down into the budget range, we've got the R9 270 for our go-to, and the GTX 750 Ti if you can't quite afford it, or if you want something that's got a zero cable requirement and lower TDP. Finally, the R7 260X is easily our go-to for sub $100. I would honestly push a lot of you toward at least the 750 Ti from the 260X, or toward a 270, because the performance difference is fairly substantial. But there are definitely use cases for a 260X, like an HTPC or a low-end gaming PC, where you're just playing something like some low-end MMOs and things like that. So it is something to consider if you're in that range. The 750 passive would be the alternative to that if you have very specific HTPC requirements. Otherwise, don't get it, because it doesn't perform that great at the end of the day compared to these mid-range and budget cards. So that's all for this video. Please hit the link in the description below if you need more help, and I will see you all next time. Peace.